was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan Tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner, and it's a big day of drama at Westminster.
It is. A parliamentary committee has concluded that the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson repeatedly and deliberately misled the Commons over lockdown parties at Downing Street. They would have recommended a 90-day suspension from the Commons for this and a tax on their report, but of course he already resigned as an MP. Johnson has hit back, calling it tripe, a lie, deranged, rubbish and anti-democratic. What do you think? Get in touch. GBViews at gbnews.com.
I have to say I don't think I've ever heard or read a statement like that from a former Prime Minister. But of course, serious, of course, in Nottingham, the grieving families of Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar came together in Nottingham last night for a very moving vigil. It was attended by thousands of mourners. We'll have the latest on the investigation live from the city with our very own Mark White.
And we've got Boris's, obviously, we heard some of the responses there from the report.
They'll be talking about it in the Commons from 10:30 this morning. We'll be there for that. And, of course, there'll be a big vote on this on Monday. But I have to say, 90 days, didn't we think it was going to be a 20-day suspension? I think those MPs on that committee had a hissy fit and thought, he's resigned. He's denied us our moment. Let's say we would have banned him for 90 days. And also, apparently, denying him access to Parliament, which most MPs get once they've retired, so he can't have a pass. That really is spiteful.
Or like me, are you sick of hearing about Partygate and you want MPs to fix our difficult lives at the moment? gbviews at gbnews.com is the email address. But first of all, here is your latest news with Rhiannon Jones.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 9:32. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. And as we've been hearing, Boris Johnson has rejected the findings of an inquiry which says he deliberately misled Parliament over Partygate. The report says the former Prime Minister committed a serious contempt and did so repeatedly. Mr Johnson describes the findings as rubbish and a deranged conclusion, accusing the committee of hypocrisy. The former PM would have faced a recommended suspension of 90 days had he not quit as an MP. Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray, says he's not surprised by the findings, nor by Mr Johnson's reaction.
What I was kind of hoping is that when the report finally came out, I was hoping that maybe Boris Johnson would finally take responsibility for his actions, for all the damage and hurt that he's caused. If he'd finally say, right, bang to rights, I'm going to take responsibility for what I've done. But it looks likely that we're just going to see, more of him blaming everyone else and trying to discredit the institution and saying that he's done nothing wrong.
Well, the Prime Minister's yet to comment on the report. This morning, Rishi Sunak was at an immigration centre in West London. His visit comes a day after the number of people crossing the English Channel this year passed 9,000. The PM acknowledged more still needs to be done to stop small boats and stressed the importance of the illegal migration bill.
That's an important strand of our work to stop the boats and tackle illegal migration. And that's because the criminal gangs use a business model that tempts people here with the offer of black market work. It's not right, which is why we've increased resources for immigration enforcement. We've increased the number of raids, like the one I was on this morning, by 50%, and we've doubled the number of arrests. But we're not complacent. There's lots of work to do, which is why it's so important that we pass our bill through Parliament.
A vigil and a minute's silence will be held in Nottingham later after an attack in the city left 3 people dead. Grace O'Malley-Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates were killed on Tuesday. Their families, friends and thousands of students gathered at the university yesterday to remember them. A 31-year-old man is being questioned on suspicion of murder. Today's vigil will be held in the Old Market Square from 5:30 this afternoon. One of 3 Brits who died after a boat caught fire in Egypt has been named as Christina Quinn. The 58-year-old was taking part in a scuba diving lesson when the vessel burst into flames on Sunday. Ms. Quinn was a chief executive of St Luke's Hospice in Plymouth. It's understood the fire was caused by an electrical problem in the boat's engine room. Her family says she'll be missed beyond words. And new figures show more than 500,000 NHS appointments and procedures have been postponed due to industrial action since December. Junior doctors in England are continuing with their 72-hour strike action today in their ongoing pay dispute with the government. The walkout's expected to lead to tens of thousands more appointments and procedures being delayed. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, though, it's back over to Andrew and Bev.
Well, it's finally out, that report, the Privileges Committee report, 30,000 words, 108 pages. It's devastating. It says Boris Johnson repeatedly lied in Parliament and also when he gave evidence to that Privileges Committee.
That's right. The committee has concluded that he recklessly misled the Commons over what he knew about parties at Downing Street.
And they would have recommended not 20 days, as we'd been led to believe, suspension from the Commons for his apparent list of offences, but 90 days, and this appears to be because of the way he consistently attacked the veracity of the committee and because, of course, he's already quit as an MP, so denied them their moment of power.
Johnson called the report tripe and deranged, amongst other things. Tom Harwood, GBNews' deputy political editor, is in the studio with us now. He doesn't pull any punches in his response, does he, Tom? But it's hardly surprising because neither did the committee.
Certainly, this is, I think, a process that has become escalated in its tension between the former Prime Minister and those sitting on the committee. And it's really interesting to note that in the conclusions, where we're seeing this extraordinary recommendation for a 90-day suspension for the charge of misleading the House, clearly exacerbated by Boris Johnson's repeated referrals to this committee as a kangaroo court. That really rubbed up the members of the committee the wrong way and seems to have exacerbated the punishment they want to install upon the Prime Minister. But also, it's not just that 90-day suspension, which is now rather a hypothetical, given that Boris Johnson, as of Monday, is no longer a member of Parliament. He's now a private citizen. What they also want to do is strip him of the right, the ordinary right of a former member of Parliament to access the parliamentary estate. So Boris Johnson, they recommend, should be stripped of what's known as a former member's pass, whereby former MPs can return to the House of Commons.
And that would be forever. He would be stripped of the right to step back into Parliament forever?
He would be stripped of the right to independently enter Parliament.
Sure.
Someone could invite him for tea, and I'm sure many MPs would. And he would be able to visit as a guest, but not having the right to have a former member's pass would mean he wouldn't be able to walk into Portcullis House or Normanshire North or the Old Palace of Westminster or any of those areas that you need a pass to sort of get through.
Tom, I think that is pathetic, pitiful and spiteful. And I was reminded the most recent member to have that pass revoked was John Bercow, who was Speaker. And that was because of a devastating report into the way he bullied emotionally his own staff and the way he apparently lied and misled the committee that investigated it. So now, this committee is now treating Boris Johnson the same as a bully, a man who bullied secretaries, reduced people to tears.
And it's curious because, if anything, some of those that I've spoken to in Number 10 in the last 2 years or so say that if Boris Johnson had a fault, it's that he was perhaps too nice to his staff, too permissive towards his staff. Let's remember that all of the grotesque reports of parties, whether it was swings being broken in the garden, wine on the walls, DJs in the basement, none of these occurred when Boris Johnson was in the building. These were usually Friday night events when Boris Johnson was out at Chequers rather than in Number 10. And, of course, Boris Johnson was found by the Metropolitan Police to have broken COVID rules, I should say, once, on one occasion, on the 30th of June 2020. Along with Rishi Sunak. All of the other allegations have been made against the Prime Minister, but the Met Police only found one. And this is an interesting point in Boris Johnson's response, because he points out that they say, I must have known the farewell events I attended. And, of course, Boris Johnson's defence has been that he did attend some events to thank staff, to keep morale up, and that was counted as work that is within the rules. That's Boris Johnson's defence. And clearly the Metropolitan Police agreed on some of those occasions. But Boris Johnson writes in his response to the committee, they say I must have known that the farewell events I attended were not authorised workplace events because, wait for it, no such event could lawfully have taken place anywhere in the country under the committee's interpretation of COVID rules. And this is Boris Johnson saying that the committee's interpretation of COVID rules is different from the Metropolitan Police's interpretation of the COVID rules. The Metropolitan Police, which cleared him for some of these gatherings, the committee has not cleared him for. And so clearly what we're seeing is a different interpretation here. And that, to some extent, is what is troubling Boris Johnson. It seems that there are different interpretations of what was within the rules and what wasn't.
Boris Johnson was being advised by David Pannick, QC, one of the most eminent lawyers in the country. So that charge he's making in this statement today would have been after talking to David Pannick, who I'd always want on my side in a court case.
Well, certainly.
If I could afford him.
And it was actually really interesting listening to some of the testimony that Boris Johnson gave before this committee several months ago now, where he said, well, look, you've got these photographs, and they presented him with photographs. They're actually in the annex of the more than 100-page, more than 30,000-word report. They've included some of these photographs, including some of the photographs of events that the Metropolitan Police found to be lawful, or the Prime Minister's attendance at those to be lawful. And the defence, one of the defences that Boris Johnson said before that committee was, do you know where these photographs came from? These photographs were taken by the Number 10 official photographer.
Yes.
Because Boris Johnson had asked for a record of them to be taken. Because everyone believed these events to be within the rules. That's Boris Johnson's defence. Now, what the committee is saying, you couldn't possibly think that these were within the rules. And clearly the committee has come to the conclusion that Boris Johnson must have been lying. But Boris Johnson does make an interesting point there, that if this was so obviously against the rules, and perhaps we could make the argument that Boris Johnson didn't understand his own rules. Perhaps that's the case. They were very complicated at various points. But it is interesting that Number 10 invited the official photographer. These photographs aren't illicit photographs. They're official photographs of what took place, because the lines between what was work and what was social are in different places depending on who you ask.
Guys, can you tell me why I should care?
I was just going to say, what do the people watching, listening, think?
Because, honestly, there'll be people watching this at home with their cup of coffee going, has everyone gone mad? I mean, I felt like that for 3 years, to be fair. Has everyone gone mad? But Why does this matter? Tell us.
It's because he was the Prime Minister who brought in draconian laws and rules, and I think they were always too draconian. And this committee of MPs, dominated by Tories, albeit Tories who hate Boris Johnson, has found that he broke those rules, but not only broke them, lied about it.
That's the crucial point.
It's the lying.
The Privileges Committee is not investigating whether or not he broke rules.
It's whether he lied about it.
Exactly.
It's Boris Johnson. He lies about everything. He's lied about everything since the moment he's been in politics and before. I didn't need Harriet Harman and her cronies to tell me that.
This is the interesting point. I think most people sitting at home will go, they're politicians. They all lie. That's what they do.
Yes.
Which isn't fair.
And to some extent, lots of politicians are very loose with the truth. They will use the most extreme interpretations of data in order to push their own agenda. That's what politics is. But the crucial point here is, can you lie in the House of Commons? Can you lie from the dispatch box? And putting aside this individual case, and I think there are big questions in terms of the propriety of the committee, in terms of the revelations we've seen in the last 24 hours, and indeed the almost agenda of the committee in some respects. Leaving that all to one side, the charge of lying to the House is a very serious one. If an MP in, for example, Prime Minister's Questions, calls another MP a liar, they will be ejected from the chamber because it is such a heavy charge in the House of Commons. And it sounds silly, right? It sounds silly because we all think of politicians as liars, but if they say something that is factually wrong at the dispatch box, they have to correct the record.
Right.
These are the rules of the chamber, and there are many ways in which the chamber has fewer rules than actually life outside. For example, parliamentary privileges allows MPs to effectively libel people if they want to, but fundamentally misleading the House is a different level and a different order, and this is all about maintaining one of those very few but very ancient rules of the House. Now, whether or not that's what actually has happened here, I suppose, is a matter open for debate, but this is what the Privileges Committee was set up to do.
And it's saying not only did he lie to the Commons repeatedly, but he lied to the committee in giving evidence. And there is a suggestion that he was told to take something out of his statement to the Privileges Committee, which he did, because he couldn't justify it, but he then said it to the committee half an hour later.
And I think that
Boris's lack of attention to detail.
This is what has exacerbated, I think, the conclusions of this report. And again, to return this to why this perhaps matters beyond the intricacies of parliamentary procedure, this is about the political future of the man who won the last election.
Let's not forget that.
This is the guy who won the last election, 2019, with the largest Tory majority since Margaret Thatcher, a higher share of the vote than Tony Blair ever managed. Boris Johnson won fewer seats than Tony Blair did in '97, but a higher share of the vote, which is quite an extraordinary achievement. And to see that in about 3.5 years, he's out of Parliament. That is a profound story.
Failure.
And big questions now over the future of Boris Johnson. What does he do next? Could he possibly return to politics? And it looks like those who have written the conclusion of this committee want to make that perhaps wish of Boris Johnson as small a likelihood as possible.
This is going to make it much more likely he tries again.
It'll have completely the opposite effect. He will be away girding his loins and working out when he can come back and enact his revenge. Let's see what James Melville thinks. Morning, James. Political writer and pundit joins us now.
James, have you ever seen a statement like that from a former Prime Minister?
No, it's historic in that respect, but I think the whole thing is missing the bigger picture. You know, we know that politicians are duplicitous, and we also know that they didn't adhere to the rules that they set. And that is the issue for most of the public. While millions of people were sacrificing their businesses, their social lives, and shutting everything down, the only hospitality unit that was open was in Whitehall. It was a betrayal of trust. And that is why trust in terms of poll ratings is at rock bottom. People have given up on our politicians. You know, the lockdown era, whether you agreed with the restrictions or not, we were all sacrificing so much, apart from many public servants. Now, Boris Johnson is the author of his own misfortune here. Many public servants were doing various things at Partygate, clinking glasses, possibly including Boris Johnson. But we need better standards of our politics. and over a very, very difficult period in our history where literally everything was shut with stupid rules and regulations that weren't following the science. They were just following political games of power and control. Meanwhile, many public servants ignored the very restrictions they were putting in place.
James, I think kind of almost regardless of where you sat on lockdown policies, etc. today, there will be quite a lot of members of the public, so those who think we should have had stricter rules, maybe people who lost loved ones and couldn't say goodbye to them in hospitals for whatever reason. Those people will be quite happy to hear that Boris Johnson can't set foot again in Westminster. And they'll be quite happy to hear that he would have had 30 days away from the House of Commons, don't you? So I feel like there's a lot of people are still angry at him.
Yeah, I mean, there's there's confirmation bias on Johnson as well. A lot of people want to get rid of him, including people in his own party. Yeah. You know, the one thing about Johnson, despite all his flaws, is he does one thing very, very well. He wins elections and referendums. He's got the common touch with a lot of people. And he poses a threat to a number of different sides. And to remove him from that takes away a big beast of winning elections. So, I mean, Johnson deserves what he's getting in one respect because actually he wasn't telling the truth. If he'd just come out at the start and said, yeah, we've got this wrong, hey, busted, you know, I'm going to come clean, he probably would have survived this. The reason this has happened to Johnson is he wasn't straight with people. And ultimately, that was always the problem with Boris Johnson. He's the great salesman, but he's also the great charlatan.
Do you think this Privileges Committee report, James, will complement and sit beside the COVID inquiry? How do the two exist together?
Well, I mean, they exist together if we look at the COVID response completely in the round. You know, we have to investigate and scrutinise all aspects of the COVID response, and it should be put together like a jigsaw puzzle in whole. What we need is a review of everything that happened during that period, not just a framed approach on one side of the debate. We need to be looking at, for instance, the collateral damages. We need to be looking at the business impact of lockdowns and restrictions. We need to be looking at the role of government policy. Were they actually following the science? We need to be looking at other aspects of collateral damages, such as waiting lists, the mental health issues, and the general economic situation that's been developed, the cost of living crisis as a result of lockdowns. All aspects need to be looked at in the round to get a full and fair and transparent inquiry.
James, I hear that, but we've already been told that the public hearings will be lasting until the middle of 2026. That's 3 years away. Then there'll be more deliberations after that. We're going to be looking probably at this report not coming out till 2028, by which time a lot of people will be dead, a lot of people will have given up and will frankly no longer even care. And perhaps that's what the government intends.
Well, exactly. I mean, when you hear the word inquiry or consultation exercise or whatever, the heart sinks because of how long it takes. I mean, other countries have completed their course of the inquiry. You know, this is taking far too long. They should be wrapping this up within 6 months with a bit of due diligence and a bit of oomph in terms of getting to the actual heart of the matter. Instead, this is going on for years and years and years. And I agree. I think that by the time the inquiry is published, it's way too late. You know, the world is moving on to other issues. There's a lot of things that still need to be resolved as an impact to the COVID response. You know, the cost of living crisis is one of those aspects. But in terms of the heart of the matter and the heat of the debate, it should be happening right now. Have some energy behind it. Have some fulfillment of basic people's desires to get to the heart of the matter and why these individuals right across the country were sacrificing so much. And yet we have, going back to Partygate again, the crux of the matter. Lots of public servants having parties when no one else could do. Did they really believe the rules and regulations that they were enforcing on everyone else? I suggest not, because they were breaking the very rules that they put in place, and that has to be put within the inquiry itself.
OK, thanks so much, James. Good to see you, James Melville there.
Powerful stuff.
Powerful stuff?
Bev, you just think you get rid of it.
Do you know what the analogy for me? A medieval battle. So you've got two armies fighting and you've got death and destruction and chaos. And then it all finishes and they have an inquiry. And there's a drummer boy that beats his drum throughout the battle. And afterwards, the drummer boy drops his drumstick during the battle and they want to find out why he drops his drumstick. and no one's looking at the death and the bodies and genuinely the excess deaths in this country at the moment. And I know that's partly what the COVID inquiry is meant to do. And I know, as we've said, it's not going to do that. I have absolutely no faith whatsoever that it's going to do that. But that feeling that we're not looking at what matters.
Tom, what is this? How much of this Privileges Committee findings will be part of the public inquiry being chaired now by Lady Hallett?
I think very little. And the reason why is this is an internal parliamentary investigation. This isn't about whether or not Boris Johnson broke the rules, although that has been part of the investigation, of course, because in order for them to, for want of a better word, get inside the mind of the Prime Minister, they have tried to find out what advice was given to the Prime Minister at the time, whether he was really advised to say no rules were broken, all the rest of it. So they have done some of that, but this is going to sit completely aside from the official statutory COVID inquiry. This is an arm of Parliament, whereas the statutory COVID inquiry is something of its own, with actually much more power in terms of calling witnesses and the rest of it. But I think we underestimate the power of the Privileges Committee when we suggest what they're doing is making a recommendation to Parliament. We've seen what happens when Parliament tries to go against the recommendations of committees like this. With the Owen Paterson affair, when a recommendation was tried to be changed, shifted, amended, that really started a free fall for the government and an embarrassing U-turn.
The downfall of Boris Johnson.
That could be seen as a crucial turning point. And so I think Boris Johnson does have a point when he says that just because Parliament has a big Conservative majority doesn't mean that they could go against what this committee says. Because what a lot of people say is, this committee doesn't matter. Look, if you're really so right and just, sort of Parliament will just disregard this committee. Parliament will not disregard this committee.
All right, thank you, Tom. Right, lots more of this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. I want to know what you think. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's another stunning day today, sunshine and very warm once again for many of us, but an increased chance of some serious thunderstorms for some later in the day. For the time being, high pressure in charge, that's to the north of the UK. Still an easterly airflow, keeping things cooler on the east coast, but inland widely temperatures will quickly rise through the morning with the wall-to-wall sunshine. As temperatures rise, there's likely to be a bit more cloud development, I think, especially towards southern and southwestern parts compared with Wednesday. But actually, for most, it's a fine day to come. Odd shower possible across North Wales as the temperatures rise, and they will rise once again into the mid to high 20s, widely above average for the time of year, but a bit more limited there for the east coast of England. Into the evening, however, some serious thunderstorms are likely to get going across Ireland, and they're most likely to drift north into parts of Northern Ireland, especially western parts. And where these hit, we could see some frequent lightning, large hail, torrential rain. Could be some impacts from those storms, but they'll be very localised. Otherwise, it's largely dry overnight, clear spells, but temperatures remaining at 15-16 Celsius across parts of the south. So a muggy night for sleeping, but a widely sunny start once again. On Friday, any thunderstorms across Ireland move away for the time being, but they develop once again into Friday afternoon and more likely to hit parts of Northern Ireland into the afternoon and evening, whilst other storms could develop across northwest England, southwest Scotland, parts of Wales as well. Once again, these will be very localised, but where they occur, they're going to be pretty lively. More widely, thunderstorms and showers will develop across western and southwestern parts on Saturday, and then across the rest of the UK generally into Sunday, and at the same time it will turn a bit cooler.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, and it's a day of huge political drama at Westminster.
Parliamentary Select Committee has said that Boris Johnson repeatedly and deliberately misled the Commons over lockdown parties at Downing Street. They would have recommended a 90-day suspension from the Commons for this and a tax on their report, but of course he'd already resigned as an MP.
Predictably, Boris Johnson's hit back and he's used some pretty strong language. Tripe, a lie, deranged, rubbish, anti-democratic. Is he talking about the committee chairman, Harriet Harman?
And the grieving families, awful scenes from yesterday evening of Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar came together in Nottingham last night. The vigil was attended by thousands of mourners. We're going to have the latest on the investigation into their deaths live from the city. Let us know what you think about all of our stories this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. I'll be getting to those as soon as possible. But first of all, here's your news with Rhiannon.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Boris Johnson has rejected the findings of an inquiry which says he deliberately misled Parliament over Partygate. The report says the former Prime Minister committed a serious contempt and did so repeatedly. It also found he was complicit in the campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. Mr Johnson describes it as a deranged conclusion and accused the inquiry of hypocrisy. The former PM would have faced a recommended suspension of 90 days had he not quit as an MP. The committee says he shouldn't be granted a former member's pass to Parliament. Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray, says he's not surprised by Mr Johnson's reaction.
What I was kind of hoping is that when the report finally came out, I was hoping that maybe Boris Johnson would finally take responsibility for his actions, for all the damage and hurt that he's caused. If he'd finally say, right, bang to rights, I'm going to take responsibility for what I've done. But it looks likely that we're just going to see, more of him blaming everyone else and trying to discredit the institution and saying that he's done nothing wrong.
Well, the Prime Minister's yet to comment on the report. This morning, Rishi Sunak was at an immigration centre and attended a raid in West London. His visit comes a day after the number of people crossing the English Channel this year passed 9,000. The PM acknowledged more needs to be done to stop small boats and stressed the importance of the illegal migration bill.
That's an important strand of our work to stop the boats and tackle illegal migration, and that's because the criminal gangs use a business model that tempts people here with the offer of black market work. It's not right, which is why we've increased resources for immigration enforcement. We've increased the number of raids, like the one I was on this morning, by 50%, and we've doubled the number of arrests. But we're not complacent. There's lots of work to do, which is why it's so important that we pass our bill through Parliament.
Rescuers are trying to find survivors after a boat capsized off the southern coast of Greece yesterday. At least 78 migrants drowned in what's being described as one of Europe's deadliest disasters of its kind in recent years. It's believed around 750 people were on board the vessel. Local media says the boat was on its way to Italy, having departed from the south of Crete. A vigil and a minute's silence will be held in Nottingham later after an attack in the city left 3 people dead. Grace O'Malley-Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates were killed on Tuesday. Their families, friends and thousands of students gathered at the university yesterday to remember them. A 31-year-old man is being questioned on suspicion of murder. Today's vigil will be held in the Old Market Square from 5:30 this afternoon. An investigation is being launched by a police watchdog following the death of a man on a railway track after being chased by police. The incident happened in South London on Wednesday. Met Police says officers began pursuing a car after it failed to stop. They then lost sight of the driver, who's believed to have climbed a fence onto the train line. He was pronounced dead at the scene. One of 3 Brits who died after a boat caught fire in Egypt has been named as Christina Quinn. The 58-year-old was taking part in a scuba diving lesson on Sunday when the vessel burst into flames. Ms Quinn was a chief executive of St Luke's Hospice in Plymouth. It's understood the fire was caused by an electrical problem in the boat's engine room. Her family says she'll be missed beyond words. New figures show more than 500,000 NHS appointments and procedures have been postponed due to industrial action since December. Junior doctors in England are continuing their 72-hour strike action today in their ongoing pay dispute with the government. The walkout's expected to lead to tens of thousands more appointments and procedures being delayed. And spectacular new photographs of Mars have been released by NASA. The 2 shots capture both the morning and afternoon views of the red planet. They were taken in black and white by the Curiosity rover designed to explore Mars. The colour was then added in to enhance the planet's distinctive copper appearance. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Andrew and Bev.
Good morning. We are looking at this report into Boris Johnson this morning in Partygate. You've been getting in touch. Mariana said the report doesn't really make sense. Rishi was in the same meeting, Starmer with his beer and curry and allegedly Bernard Jenkins at a birthday party. No mention at all of any positive or good things that Boris has done. Boris is right. It is a kangaroo court. It is spiteful and vindictive. Lots of you getting in touch with those messages.
And, of course, this parliamentary committee, chaired by the Labour MP, Dame Harriet Harman, says the former Prime Minister, repeatedly and recklessly misled the Commons and their own committee over what he knew about parties at Downing Street.
He's called the report trite, Boris Johnson says, and deranged.
Lively language. Join us now, live from Westminster's GB News presenter and former Cabinet Minister and former Leader of the Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, morning to you. We had been led to believe this was going to be closer to a 20-day recommended suspension. 90 days, 3 months. My jaw dropped, frankly. It reeks to me of spite and malice.
Well, they only did that after he'd resigned and the sanction became completely OTOs, that the only sanction they're actually imposing is to take away his former member's parliamentary pass, which I imagine will upset Boris Johnson enormously. There's no real sanction in this, and I think 90 days is merely trying to make a point. But I want to come to the details of the report, if I may, because if you look at Annex 1, the report tries to answer the questions posed by Boris Johnson on the 9th of June. And one of the points he makes was that most of the members of the committee, especially the chair, had already expressed deeply prejudicial remarks about my guilt before they had seen the evidence. They should have recused themselves. Now, Annex 1 purports to answer the questions in Boris Johnson's letter of the 9th of June. It absolutely fails to do so. It makes no mention of this. And this is fundamental because the fairness of the Procedure Committee as a committee of Parliament must follow the fairness of the Judicial Committee of the House of Lords. And you will remember the Hoffman principle, that Lord Hoffman's judgment was overturned by the House of Lords Judicial Committee because of an interest of his wife, not even his own interest, because people who are on a parliamentary committee that has a judicial or quasi-judicial role needs to be above doubt. And it is a notable omission of this report that it doesn't respond to that point made so fairly by Boris Johnson.
And Jacob, you all know that the person due to chair the Privileges Committee was the Labour MP Chris Bryant. He recused himself quite properly because he had been very public in his criticism of Boris by saying that Boris had lied or misled the Commons. Harriet Harman had done exactly the same, and she described how it was an egregious breach of the rules. How was she therefore allowed to chair the proceedings?
Well, that's absolutely right. Mr. Chris Bryant behaved absolutely properly and recused himself because he had prejudged it. Harriet Harman did not. And the problem with that is that the chairman of committees is extremely influential and important. The first draft that goes to the committee to vote on is prepared by the chairman of the committee. And that level of power, authority, of influence is one that needs to be exercised by somebody who has not judged the case before the committee. And I think this is a fundamental flaw which undermines all the work of the committee.
Jacob, I can't help but read the messages from GB News viewers and conclude that this report might have the opposite effect than what Harriet Harman might have intended. So, for instance, Dawn has got in touch and she says, this is a witch hunt. I'm so angry. Never again will my husband and I vote Conservative unless Boris Johnson is there to become Prime Minister.
I think if you look back over the history of Parliament, Parliament sometimes makes a great mistake when it tries to stand on its dignity. In the old days, people who said disobliging things about Parliament were summoned to the bar of the House. They last did this with John Junor in the 1950s when he accused members of fiddling their petrol allowances. The House of Commons made itself, in its righteousness, look foolish. And I think that this report is in danger of making the House of Commons look foolish.
I think, I'm just checking, Andrew Roberts, you know very well, Lord Andrew Roberts, the historian, said she on three occasions on one day accused Boris Johnson last year of misleading the Commons. So perhaps it's legitimate for Boris to say it's a kangaroo court, and yet that criticism has led to them upping the ante to 90 days ban if he was still an MP.
Well, I think the House of Commons is always in difficult territory when it criticises freedom of speech and tries to say that you must not criticise what politicians are doing. And bear in mind that Harriet Harman is a senior Labour politician. It is completely routine for senior Labour politicians to criticise Conservatives and vice versa. That is what happens in our adversarial political system. And suddenly to say that because it's a committee of the House that those criticisms can't be made doesn't make any sense. Can you not criticise a committee on transport that comes up with a recommendation you don't like?
Jacob, you know Boris Johnson fairly well. With one sort of eye on his mindset, what would he be thinking now? Will he be going away from politics, as was presumably come back stronger in some future iteration?
I mean, that's a very good question. I think his options are very much open to him, that he remains a very popular figure in the Conservative Party and on the right of politics. He has an extraordinary connection with voters that other politicians can only dream of. And I think many associations in the country where a member is standing down would welcome him as their candidate with open arms. So I think his options are very much open. And he remains the biggest figure in British politics, doesn't he? Look at College Green, where I am now. All the cameras are out. Everybody's fascinated because it's about Boris. He is a big fish.
The language he's used in his response, Jacob, is very Boris. He's called the statement tripe. He's called it deranged. That is a sign, isn't it, of just how angry he is. Geeta Harry, who's his former spin doctor, writing in my paper, the Daily Mail today, saying he is absolutely enraged by the way he says he's been treated by this committee.
Well, I think he does feel very badly treated. There's one example that the committee comes to the conclusion that he must have thought something when he was doing something. Yes. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think it's ever possible to assume what people must have thought during the course of a busy day. So they say he must have noticed when he was going upstairs that something was happening in a different room.
That's right.
They weren't there, they didn't see it, they don't know what was visible. It is pure speculation on behalf of the committee, as if they've got Elon Musk's chip and have put it into Boris's mind to try and work out what he was thinking some time ago.
It's the Mystic Meg moment, Jacob, of the report.
It's an extraordinary part of the report. Also, I was leader of the House at the time, and one of the things the report concentrates on is the line to take. Was Boris really told that the line to take was that the rules were followed at all times? And I know that it was, because as leader of the House, for business questions, you get the briefing pack for PMQs the day before, and your own briefing on top of it. I was told, as leader of the House, that if this came up, my answer was that the rules were followed at all times. That was the government line. It was the line given to the Prime Minister, and he repeated it. If you can't rely on official...
But Jacob, was that advice from officials? Was that from officials, that advice?
Yes, it was from officials. That was from officials. That was the advice that went from Downing Street to the leader's office, and I was told absolutely categorically that if somebody asked me about this, my answer was to be that the rules were followed at all times, and the all times was emphasised to me. I can recall it so clearly sitting in my office being told this before business questions.
What next, Jacob, for Boris, do you think?
Well, he remains a very big figure. As I was saying, that's why we're all discussing him today. I think his options are very open. He dominates the airwaves in a way other politicians go slightly green about the gills over.
Can I ask you whether it's entirely coincidental, do you think, that Rishi Sunak this morning has done a very powerful photo call with the police wearing a stab vest on the day that Boris Johnson gets found guilty by the Privileges Committee?
No, I think you're being much too cynical for once. I think that is a routine prime ministerial engagement, and particularly after the terrible events in Nottingham, I'm not surprised that the Prime Minister wants to be doing something that is very strongly supporting the police.
OK, all right, thank you.
Can I just ask you finally one question? He's no longer an MP. There will be a general election almost certainly next year, Jacob. Do you think Boris Johnson will be deployed by Rishi Sunak for what he is, a formidable election winner, campaigning perhaps in the Red Wall, or do you think Rishi Sunak will want him hidden from public view?
Rishi Sunak is a sensible man. He will want Boris absolutely to the fore, particularly in the Red Wall. Boris is a campaigner without parallel.
All right, well, that's Jacob Rees-Mogg. And don't forget, of course, he's here Monday to Thursday. Jacob Rees-Mogg, GB News presenter. Yeah, College Green, Tom, it's one of these great parliamentary occasions when it's rammed with broadcasters, rammed with people taking selfies, rammed with politicians trying to get their 15 minutes of fame.
Absolutely. It'll be a very busy day because let's not forget the scale of this report. I have not read it in full yet.
No.
We have
30,000 words.
We have a team out there behind those screens going through sections of it by themselves. We're getting new information all the time. I've gone through the key words and found the bits that I think are the most relevant as well. But the crucial point here is that now, because most people won't read this report in full, and it's the length of a short book, most people won't read this report in full. What will really matter, and the reason we're going to see College Green very busy, we're going to see Central Lobby very busy, politicians will be wanting to get their own arguments about this report out. And to be honest, to some extent, it's how this is now presented, some might say spun, that will matter to some politicians more. We've already heard from the Labour Party, we've heard from Jacob Rees-Mogg, no doubt we'll be hearing from some of those members of the committee putting across their case as well. And that's what today is all about. It becomes a battle for the narrative.
Will we hear from Dame Harriet Harman? Because she has to answer that question, should you not have recused yourself?
I think we will hear from Harriet Harman. The question is, will we hear from her today? The committee have already indicated that they want to sort of release a further publication on what they believe has been an attempt by people allied to Boris Johnson to impugn certain members of the committee. Now, there is no doubt that what they are referring to there are, for example, the stories that have emerged about Bernard Jenkin and his alleged lockdown party
birthday party for his wife.
A Tier 2 lockdown. It's clear that this is not the last we will have heard from the Privileges Committee on this matter. What is less clear, however, is whether the Privileges Committee will continue to speak with one voice or whether we will see those individual interviews.
The Liberal Democrats have now called for Johnson to lose his £115,000 a year annual allowance.
What's the justification for that?
The ex-Prime Minister.
This allowance doesn't go to former Prime Ministers, it's for their staff.
Exactly.
And it's the same argument that's happened over Liz Truss.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened to any Prime Minister until the last two that we've had. Until the last two Prime Ministers, not a single party, there was cross-party consensus that if you are someone who has that level of profile, who has that level of security need, no matter the politics of them, Tony Blair gets it, despite the accusations of
illegal
Iraq over Iraq and all the rest of it. John Major gets it.
He does.
Gordon Brown gets it.
Yeah.
David Cameron gets it. Theresa May gets it. It's only until now that suddenly we're seeing these partisan calls to strip. And again, this isn't money that goes to them as an individual. It's a misnomer. It's like some of these MPs' expenses that doesn't go to the MP as a person. This goes to the running of the political operation of an office.
And a former Prime Minister, I mean, they still are a figure around the world, and there's a huge correspondence pouring in. It's a pretty silly, childish, juvenile attempt by the Lib Dems to have a piece of the action, in my view. Well,
that is certainly, I think, a view that will probably be shared across the House. I think it's unlikely that will happen. Of course, what we saw with the Liz Truss furore is that although a number of politicians spoke up about it and got their name in the media for a few days and tried to kick up a fuss, ultimately sense prevailed and Liz Truss does still have the ability to run an office.
It was
and
Daisy...
I think it will be the same with...
Daisy Cooper, the deputy
Daisy
leader.
Cooper, the Lib Dem deputy leader, who said Rishi Sunak must cut off Johnson's ex-Prime Minister allowance to stop him milking the public purse for his own personal gain. Anything less would be an insult to bereaved families who suffered while Boris Johnson lied and
She should wash her mouth out. That is pathetic. And actually, we shouldn't forget, the first ever deputy Prime Minister to get a similar allowance was one Lib Dem called Sir Nick Clegg. He finally gave it up when he went to Google, earning millions of pounds a year.
Well, Boris Johnson is earning millions of pounds a year. I don't think he should be getting that money, but I don't think it should be as a result of this. I think that does, clearly they're just capitalising on that. Everyone's going to bowl in now, aren't they?
It could well be the case that Boris Johnson voluntarily says, I don't need this, I'm running... But, hey, if Boris Johnson gets to an older age and perhaps all of his money's going to his children's education, who knows?
Well, it depends how many he's had by then, I suppose.
Well, quite.
Tom, I think
to take it away as a statutory level, would seem inconsistent.
I think that's a suggestion that he hasn't taken the money anyway.
I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know, but I think the demand that a former Prime Minister should not get the rights of a former Prime Minister
because of a report.
What appears to be based on a political disagreement, really, is a bad precedent to set.
I mean, by all means, take it off him for other reasons, but that doesn't seem to be the right one, in my opinion. Anyway, still to come. We're going to carry on with the Partygate coverage
And we are going to Nottingham, of course.
And we're going to reflect on awful events in Nottingham and the parents who were there at the vigil last night with thousands of students and families to lament the loss of those beautiful 2 young people. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
News channel.
It's 10:25. You're with To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So, we're going to go back to Partygate now. Joining us now is Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and Senior Political Correspondent for The Guardian, Aubrey Allegretti. Aubrey, let me come to you first. What do you make of the report and also Boris Johnson's response?
I think it's all fairly as expected, really, in terms of the kind of broad brush headline stuff. But when you delve into the detail, it's really quite extraordinary, both the size of the punishment, the sanction that the committee was preparing to levy, and in terms of the detail. I think the committee doesn't hold back in terms of identifying that it doesn't think there was any reasonable excuse that Boris Johnson could come up with for attending some of these events and there being necessary for work purposes. The response from Boris Johnson itself, well, he's been sort of escalating since Friday. It seems like sort of more blistering attacks on the committee. And I suppose that it's only going to rile Conservative MPs even more and divide them further between the sort of pro and anti-Boris Johnson camps, which means that there's going to be a very awkward showdown probably come Monday when Rishi Sunak puts this to a vote in Parliament.
But Aubrey, are these committee members really so sensitive that they have to dramatically increase the proposed length of the suspension from what we thought was going to be 20 days to 90 days because he had the temerity to call it a kangaroo court? Why can't he call it a kangaroo court? Parliament is all about having different opinions. He's entitled to criticise the fact Harriet Harman had already made her mind up in a series of tweets 12 months ago. And it does seem to me, looking at some of the way it's written, that it does seem to be a touch of pique about these conclusions.
I think that the attacks on the committee are a smaller part of the other sort of egregious findings against Boris Johnson. Arguably, the worst thing he did was leak the findings of the report last Friday. Leaking a select committee report is one of the worst things you can do if you're an MP. That is a huge contempt of Parliament. Boris Johnson was given it under sort of strict embargo. He had 2 weeks to reply to set out his case and respond, and the committee were then going to decide whether or not that should change their mind. But instead, what did Boris Johnson do? He sort of flew off the handle and he decided to leak the findings instead, saying exactly what the report was supposed to say. I think that is probably part of the main reason that the escalation went from sort of 20 days to 90 days in terms of a recommended suspension.
It's a bit of a joke, though, isn't it, when the police looked at exactly the same action and concluded that he'd done nothing wrong apart from that one penalty notice that he and Rishi Sunak both got, for then the committee to effectively conclude, well, the police were wrong and he knew what he was doing, he did things wrong, and then he lied about it.
No, they were investigating completely different things. The police didn't conclude that Boris Johnson didn't do anything wrong. They found that he broke the law on one occasion, and the committee's been investigating something else entirely, which is whether or not he misled Parliament. The police doesn't investigate whether or not MPs mislead Parliament. They've never investigated that. So they're looking at very different things, and that's why, you know, the police investigation finished a year ago, and this one has taken quite a lot longer because it's looking at something completely different.
Let's bring Henry Hill in here. Henry, from Conservative Home, a typical Boris Johnson response, flamboyant language referring to the reporter's tripe and deranged. How do you think there will be some sympathy, however, now amongst Tory MPs and Tory members about this, because of the scale of the proposal, not just to ban him for 90 days from the Commons, but to take away his pass, which he would be entitled to as a former Member of Parliament?
I think there will. For the most part, I think that opinions on this have had so long to crystallise and polarise that I'd be very surprised if there were all that many Conservative members who are going through the details of this report and changing their minds. But in terms of the big picture, Boris Johnson has been trying to portray himself as a martyr and the victim of an unjust process. And while I think Aubrey is correct that that eye-watering suspension does almost certainly have much to do with the way that Boris has conducted himself over the last few days, I do think it does risk looking spiteful that they've not only recommended a suspension that would have been enough to trigger a by-election, but they've also done all of these additional recommendations. And I don't think that Boris Johnson's committed supporters, at least, will be awfully sympathetic to the idea that actually all of this is justified because he criticised the process. You know, the House of Commons does have a right, I think, to defend its processes, but it does nonetheless, as you say, sound a little bit ridiculous that politicians saying political things about other politicians can warrant such an extraordinary sanction. So I do think that the sheer scale of some of these, while they doubtless reflect real anger on the part of the committee, do risk being counterproductive in terms of playing into Boris Johnson's hands.
Wouldn't the Parliament have been in a much better place if they had not allowed Harriet Harman to chair this committee? She's a distinguished MP, she's a lawyer, but she was on record, Henry, we'll bring Aubrey in this as well later, she was on record as saying more than once, 3 times in fact, on social media that Boris Johnson had misled Parliament, he'd lied to Parliament and he'd broken his own rules, which were very serious rules. So she'd gone into this inquiry with her mind made up.
I think it would have been better for the appearance of the process, certainly had it would have been a Labour MP, I believe, but a different Labour MP. It's not to impugn the way that Harriet Harman has conducted the process. I don't know. I'm not saying that she's done anything wrong. But certainly, if you're a layman, if you're somebody who hasn't followed this story in intense detail and isn't the kind of person who's professionally obliged to read a 30,000-word report, then certainly the fact that she did that, and it looks so similar to what Chris Bryant did, and Chris Bryant did recuse himself, it just damages the perception of the process. And I think this is important because the House of Commons has to police itself. It can never be a normal workplace. MPs are democratically elected representatives with an independent mandate, so they can't have a normal HR process. So that's why you have these committee investigations, which are then voted on by the House of Commons. But that means that it's incumbent on the MPs overseeing those processes to take extra care to make sure that they are seen to be discharging those functions impartially and judicially. And I'm not sure that Harriet Harman's position at the chair of this inquiry has helped that impression.
Can I just read what she actually did? She retweeted a tweet by Alistair Campbell, who was Tony Blair's spin doctor, which said Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak broke their own emergency laws. They lied repeatedly. They trashed the ministerial code. And yet she chaired this wretched hearing for a year.
We've got to move on, gentlemen. I'm very sorry. Henry Hill there and Aubrey Allegretti from The Guardian. Thank you very much. Right, we've got to move on.
Bizarre, though, isn't it? That's her view.
We're late to go for the news. Yeah, and the frustrating thing is that means nobody is satisfied because nobody feels that it was impartial. Right, we're going to reflect on the vigils that took place in Nottingham last night after the awful events earlier in the week. That's all after your news with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Bev. Good morning. It's 10:33, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Boris Johnson has rejected the findings of an inquiry which says he deliberately misled Parliament over Partygate. The report says the former Prime Minister committed a serious contempt and did so repeatedly. It also found he was complicit in the campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. Mr Johnson described it as a deranged conclusion and accused the inquiry of hypocrisy. The former PM would have faced a recommended suspension of 90 days had he not quit as an MP. The committee says he shouldn't be granted a former member's pass to Parliament. Conservative MP and GB News presenter Jacob Rees-Mogg says Boris Johnson's future remains unclear.
I think his options are very much open to him, that he remains a very popular figure in the Conservative Party and on the right of politics. He has an extraordinary connection with voters that other politicians can only dream of. And I think many associations in the country where a member is standing down would welcome him as their candidate with open arms. So I think his options are very much open.
Well, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's yet to comment on the report. This morning, he was at an immigration centre and attended a raid in West London. His visit comes a day after the number of people crossing the English Channel this year passed 9,000. The PM acknowledged more needs to be done to stop small boats and stressed the importance of the illegal migration bill. A massive search for survivors is underway after a boat carrying migrants capsized off the southern coast of Greece yesterday. At least 78 people drowned in what's being described as one of Europe's deadliest disasters of its kind in recent years. Hundreds of others are missing, feared dead. It's believed the boat was on its way to Italy, having departed from the south of Crete. And a vigil and a minute's silence will be held in Nottingham later after an attack in the city left 3 people dead. Grace O'Malley-Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates were killed on Tuesday. Their families, friends and thousands of students gathered at the university yesterday to remember them. A 31-year-old man is being questioned on suspicion of murder. Today's vigil will be held in the Old Market Square from 5:30 this afternoon. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2662 and €1.1681. The price of gold is £1,525.83 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,600 points.
Good morning. You are watching To The Point on GB News. Of course, yesterday the vigils took place in Nottingham. Thousands were in attendance to pay their respects. We're going to be reflecting on that in just a moment. And our panel are going to be in the studio. Sam Lister and Carol Malone. Don't go anywhere. This is GB News.
Probably heard Carol already.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:40. This is The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearson, Bev Turner.
Now, the Conservative MP Brendan Clarke-Smith has been speaking about the Privileges Committee report finding. He is a Boris Johnson supporter. Here's what he had to say. He's apparently going to tell it. He is going to tell us in a moment. We're confident. Let there be conversation. There's no conversation.
I think it's spiteful, vindictive and overreaching, quite frankly. This is a complete
report. As Boris Johnson says, this feels very much like a stitch-up. In terms of due process, we'll all do that. I don't think he has been treated fairly at all. And saying he's deliberately misled the House, I mean, how can they possibly come to that conclusion? Where is the evidence for this? I've not seen any. So I'm going to be speaking against this, I'm going to be voting against this, and I hope other colleagues do so as well. Thank you.
The vote will be on Monday. Sam Lister, who's Political Express, is here with us, and Karen Malone, political commentator. Look, the front pages today are all about Nottingham. Tomorrow they're going to be all about Boris.
Oh, God, yeah.
I was staggered it was a 90-day suspension.
Me too. It is, you know, there was a story in the papers last Thursday saying that they didn't think it was even going to be a 10-day suspension. In fact, I wrote about it, and then, of course, it came out later in the day. Boris had resigned, and we realised why. Because he had seen the report and he saw it was 20 days at that point.
Yeah.
And, of course, then he launched his attack on the committee quite rightly. I mean, I wondered last week why he resigned. I thought, if you're only getting 10 days, why are you resigning? And then you read this and you know exactly why. It is astonishingly spiteful. This was done in a fit of pique by a committee that were always going to find him guilty. Harman should never have chaired that committee. It is an outrage that she was there. She tweeted long before the committee started gathering evidence that she thought he was guilty already. What was it she said? They lied.
Yeah, repeatedly.
They lied repeatedly, and they trusted their own rules. And here she was chairing this committee. It's astonishing. And I just think, you know, I think this is going to make people, even people who don't like Boris, who didn't want him to come back, this is going to put him on the side, because this looks like an abuse of privilege. This looks like an abuse of the rules.
I've looked back in recent months years to see other bans for MPs. The only other one which was longer, Sam, was the revolting Keith Vaz, who was suspended for 6 months for lying about procuring drugs for male rent boys.
And I think John Bercow, if he hadn't have quit, he would have faced a lifetime suspension.
And of course, they took his pass away as well. They took Bercow's pass away for being a bully, accused of being a bully. I mean, that's the astonishing thing.
But I think just one minor thing to note is that the vote on Monday is actually on Boris Johnson's birthday. That's interesting way for him to mark that. And obviously, that was the day when he was ambushed by the cake. So quite symbolic, really.
This explains why, doesn't it, that the Johnson has come out and he's attacked what's his name, Bernard Jenkins, who was on the committee and who, if you might remember, gave Boris a really hard time during questioning.
Tory MP.
Bernard Jenkins, Tory MP for 31 years.
Yeah.
And he's now the allegation is there that Bernard Jenkins himself went to a lockdown party. It was a drinks do for his wife Anne for her 65th birthday, and this came out yesterday on Guido Fawkes' website. And he said then he wasn't at any parties, but. And it sounds to me very much like he may well have been at this. And what Boris is saying is, if this turns out to be the case, this is monstrous hypocrisy. The man who was voting to ban him from Parliament has been alleged to have been to a party for his own wife, hosted no less by the Deputy Commons Speaker, Dame Eleanor Lang, exactly, who you know, I think.
I do. Very nice woman.
Yeah, she's a very nice woman. But she is saying it was socially distanced. But it doesn't matter, because this party was held at a time when there was supposed to be no indoor socialising. So if it turns out that Jenkins did go to this party, well, then he would be expected to resign, wouldn't he?
Well, what do you make of that, Sam?
Well, I think this is a big problem. I think the committee's actually been quite naive, really, right from the start, because actually, when you've got Harriet Harman chairing it, who obviously the Boris supporters can say she's biased, they can point to that tweet, then you've got Sir Bernard Jenkins, who is a long-time foe of Boris Johnson. There are other members on that committee who their impartiality is called into question by Boris supporters. If you're going to investigate a former Prime Minister who is incredibly polarising, when those people who love him with, you know, all their heart and feel like he's been persecuted, you really should go out of your way to make sure that committee looks incredibly squeaky clean. And what they've done is they've had a committee that people can call into question, and they've come out with a kind of ruling that is so over the top, it just plays into Boris Johnson's hands.
Yeah, it enables him to be the victim.
Exactly.
But the Bernard Jenkins things isn't going to get the coverage it should maybe have got. And I thought with him releasing the Jenkins stuff, that would distract from the report, but not when it's a 90-day suspension.
And look, and the report is 30,000 words and 108 pages.
And no one's going to, you know, the sad of this thing is nobody's going to read the whole report. They're just going to take the headlines. And we know that there are certain sections of the mainstream media that are going to use the very worst things that have been levelled at him. But, you know, I'm just wondering, all these MPs, if it turns out Jenkins did go to this party, you know, I wonder how many people having a go at Boris can say hand on heart they didn't break a single rule.
Well, I wonder how many people here can say that.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of us probably inadvertently did.
Sam,
the rules were changing.
She's bursting to say something or bursting to say nothing at all. Which is
you know what? I tried my very best to abide by the rules. I really did, because I thought, you know, I felt it was important at the time. But you know, it's
I think I did on a walk with a friend, social distance, say, I haven't had a drink for 4 weeks. Should we have a gin and tonic? You probably know who the friend is. We won't name her.
I know exactly who that friend is, yes.
And we were socially distanced when we were having the drink, but you weren't allowed to even do that.
But do you remember the two women who were walking on the down somewhere, who had a coffee together and they were pursued by cops?
They were.
Yeah. So this is this is what makes people angry, that, you know, even like a little breach by Boris, you know, what some people would consider to be a small one, when you think
you know
the
what Bev's
context
thinking
us...
is? Bev's not saying much because she thinks this whole thing is a complete distraction.
Do you what you think? What is a distraction?
I just think that I can understand why it's important in terms of the parliamentary system, and that we can't have politicians, Tom explained it very well, standing up at the dispatch box and just blatantly lying. I'm not sure he did lie.
No.
I honestly, I don't think he did lie.
Well, he says he didn't.
That was never
I think,
the charge.
as he said, take it from the Metropolitan Police. This is Boris's statement. The police investigated my role at all of these events. In no case did they find what I'd done was unlawful. Above all, it did not cross my mind, therefore, as I spoke in the Commons, that the comments were unlawful. And so I don't think he lied at all, but I just think that the public don't care. I just think the public don't care at the moment about Partygate. I think we want to be able to afford our shopping and pay our fuel bills and pay for our petrol. And I think we are so frustrated by politicians navel-gazing, looking back through this sort of weird Alice in Wonderland world that they all appear to be living in, and not fixing the country.
I think that's right, Bev. I think people are, you know, people hate politicians talking about themselves.
Yeah.
But all I would say is I cannot tell you how the response we've had from readers this week. I mean, they are furious about what's happened to Boris.
Yeah.
And they're so, honestly, we've had thousands of comments, we've had letters.
But you're saying they're furious about what's happened to Boris.
Yeah.
And I feel like while we're all talking about this, nobody's looking at whether any of the decisions were right in the first place.
But of course, that will come into the inquiry, of course.
Yeah, and it is a joke when they're talking, when they're screaming at each other. We saw during Brexit.
And also, why shouldn't he call it a kangaroo court if he wants to? Why are these flipping MPs on the Prison Committee so oh, my God, they call it a kangaroo court. Let's ban him for 90 days.
Well, this punishment is outrageous. He's got every right. And that's when he called it a kangaroo court, when he saw it was going to be 20 days.
What do you think they said? What should we do, 30 days? 40?
But how can you
70?
increase it to 90 days because they say he's disrespected?
He made it was a terrible breach of parliamentary rules because he leaked the report.
Yes.
I think as well that, you know, I think this is a big problem for the Conservative Party because there's blind fury on both sides about this. You saw the comment from Brendan Clarke-Smith there talking about how spiteful this was, and obviously the Boris Johnson supporters are really angry. But on the other side, there are a lot of MPs who are Rishi Sunak supporters who never really were in Boris Johnson's camp.
They're happy to see him go.
And they feel they are angry. They feel he is adopting Trumpian tactics. They actually are angry that he is impugning the integrity of a parliamentary committee. So, you know, this just intensifies the fights that are going on in the Conservative Party at the moment.
But Boris would say he's not impugned the committee at all. He is still sticking by his story that he did not willfully mislead Parliament. He might have done it accidentally, and he apologised in the Commons so many times. I think it was 14 times or something.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot more he can do than that, and he still maintains it was not a willful misleading of Parliament. So, you know, this is the opinion of a committee. This is not about evidence. They can't say it's evidence that has led them to this. This is their opinion.
With a bit of mind reading thrown in.
Yeah,
exactly.
Mystic Meg.
Yes.
He must have known as he was walking up some stairs.
What happens on Monday now with the vote, Sam? What happens now? Is everybody free to vote in the way that they wish?
They won't be whipped,
will they?
No, and I think it will be interesting because I think actually most Conservative MPs will back the committee.
I agree.
Yeah.
Because that's the precedent.
Do you think so?
Yes, I do.
Do you?
There'll be Boris supporters, the diehards like Brendan, who we had on earlier, and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorries, who's still an MP, of course.
Yes.
They will vote for it.
But didn't Rees-Mogg say that the Commons will make fools of themselves if they pass this?
It's whether they just vote to take note of the report or vote to accept the findings.
Do they
of the
get a
report.
choice?
Well, I don't know who makes that decision. We're waiting to hear from the Leader of the House, Penny Mordaunt, because I think it'll be probably to do with her.
Well,
I
she's
suspect
not
Rishi
keen on them, is
Sunak.
she?
No, I suspect Rishi Sunak will want it to be MPs vote on agreeing with the report because he wants the scale of the opposition to be Boris to be revealed in the vote by Tory MPs. It's a pretty brutal old business politics, isn't it?
Really is.
Isn't it? And in a way, that's interesting. I'm interested in that because that's moving the story
That's
forward.
what he wants to do.
I mean,
the Prime Minister will want Boris humiliated by that vote, so he goes away and thinks the psychodrama comes to an end. The idea of Boris is going away,
He's
going
going
anywhere.
nowhere.
For the birds.
And even if he was going to slip back, I suspect he's so angry now that he's
Very
saying,
angry.
sod it, you know.
But the implications of that vote then on Monday are enormous in terms of the next election and how the Conservative Party will be united or divided after Monday, and what role Rishi Sunak will play in that. That's an interesting...
And Labour MPs will be monitoring the vote, so every Tory MP who votes against the report, they'll be highlighting that at the general election, saying they wanted to keep Boris Johnson in the
And you've
Commons.
got to remember the Tory grassroots are with Boris.
They are. They are.
The Parliamentary Party are with Rishi, so big problems.
We have to talk about Nottingham this week. We cannot let this section go by without reflecting on the loss of these parents, Barnaby and Grace, of course, the two youngsters that lost their life, and also the caretaker. We mustn't forget
Father
him.
of three, Ian Charles, Coates, that's right, 65, on his way to work. He did what a good Samaritan did. He was flagged down by this lunatic, stopped, he was dragged out the van and stabbed to death.
You know what? This man helped kids. He tried to help kids keep away from crime. He used to go away with them on trips and stuff. But you know what really has got to me about this is the senselessness of the killings of all three of them, you know. It's because it's not just Barnaby and Grace and Ian that have been taken, it is their families. It is their, you know, with the kids, it's their parents, it's their siblings. You know, we've all interviewed people who have lost children in the most brutal of ways. Those families are never fixed. They have 20 years ahead of them of sadness. And, you see, and all for what? For a guy who we're told has mental health problems, as if in some way that justifies it or excuses it. You have to have mental health problems to kill people.
And the son of Ian put out a statement saying, broken, the tragedy had rocked everyone's world. If we'd had to think about it, he'd be lying in a bed with us holding his hand, him dying naturally in 20 to 30 years' time, not dying on the street because some guy decided it's not his day today.
Awful, Sam. There's not really any words to sum up how tragic.
There aren't. I mean, I just think, I hope the parents found some comfort in the fact that there was this great show yesterday of all the students turning out. And, you know, I mean, what can anybody say in this scenario? It's just truly awful. But I think at least that demonstrated how...
You do, Sam, but, you know, when they go to those things, it distracts them for now.
Yeah.
The real pain kicks in when it's gone quiet, and when their kids are missing from their lives, and when Ian's relatives, you know, don't see him every week and whatever.
He was retiring in 4 months.
You know, I just think these beautiful, brilliant, talented kids gone forever, and Ian, this much-loved family man, gone for what?
Yeah, quite. Right, Carol and Sam, thank you so much for that. We will be back in just a moment. You are watching GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's another stunning day today, sunshine and very warm once again for many of us, but an increased chance of some serious thunderstorms for some later in the day. For the time being, high pressure in charge, that's to the north of the UK. Still an easterly airflow, keeping things cooler on the east coast, but inland, widely, temperatures will quickly rise through the morning with the wall-to-wall sunshine. As temperatures rise, there's likely to be a bit more cloud development, I think, especially towards southern and southwestern parts compared with Wednesday. But actually, for most, it's a fine day to come. Odd shower possible across North Wales as the temperatures rise, and they will rise once again into the mid to high 20s, widely above average for the time of year, but a bit more limited there for the east coast of England. Into the evening, however, some serious thunderstorms are likely to get going across Ireland, and they're most likely to drift north into parts of Northern Ireland, especially western parts. And where these hit, we could see some frequent lightning, large hail, torrential rain. Could be some impacts from those storms, but they'll be very localised. Otherwise, it's largely dry overnight, clear spells, but temperatures remaining at 15, 16 Celsius across parts of the south. So a muggy night for sleeping, but a widely sunny start once again. On Friday, any thunderstorms across Ireland move away for the time being, but they develop once again into Friday afternoon and more likely to hit parts of Northern Ireland into the afternoon and evening, whilst other storms could develop across northwest England, southwest Scotland, parts of Wales as well. Once again, these will be very localised, but where they occur, they're going to be pretty lively. More widely, thunderstorms and showers will develop across western and southwestern parts on Saturday and then across the rest of the UK generally into Sunday, and at the same time it will turn a bit cooler.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is To The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
What a day of drama at Westminster. Boris Johnson has been handed a blow with Parliamentary Privileges Committee report today saying that he repeatedly and deliberately misled the Commons over lockdown parties at Downing Street. They've recommended a 90-day suspension, but of course he has already resigned as an MP.
He's hit back in typically Boris style. He says the report is tripe, a lie, deranged, rubbish and anti-democratic. I'd love to know what he thinks of the committee chairman, Dame Harriet Harman.
And we're also reflecting this morning on the grieving families of Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar, and also the elderly gentleman, 65-year-old Ian Coates, who died. The parents of the students came together in Nottingham last night for a vigil attended by thousands of mourners. We'll have the latest with Mark White in Nottingham. Let us know what you think about all our stories this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. I'm now thinking forward to Monday in this vote, you know.
Well, and we'll know more about that because Penny Morton, who's the leader of the Commons, she, of course, with the ceremonial sword at the coronation of King Charles III, she will tell the Commons very soon, probably in our time, what the detail of the vote, what time the vote will be. Will it be to take note of the report? No problem. Or will it be an opportunity for MPs to say, yes, they support the report, in which case how many Tory MPs vote to say they would have agreed with getting rid of Boris for 90 days? Very interesting.
First of all, here's your news with Rihanna.
Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 11. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Boris Johnson has rejected the findings of an inquiry which says he deliberately misled Parliament over Partygate. The report says the former Prime Minister committed a serious contempt and did so repeatedly. It's also found he was complicit in the campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. Mr Johnson describes it as a deranged conclusion and accused the inquiry of hypocrisy. The former PM would have faced a recommended suspension of 90 days had he not quit as an MP. The committee says he shouldn't be granted a former member's pass to Parliament. Conservative MP and GB News presenter Jacob Rees-Mogg says Boris Johnson's future remains unclear. Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray, says he's not surprised by Mr Johnson's reaction.
What I was kind of hoping is that when the report finally came out, I was hoping that maybe Boris Johnson would finally take responsibility for his actions, you know, for all the damage and hurt that he's caused. You know, if he'd finally say, right, bang to rights, I'm going to take responsibility for what I've done. But it looks likely that we're just going to see, you know, more of him blaming everyone else and trying to discredit the institution and saying that he's done nothing wrong.
A massive search for survivors is underway after a boat capsized off the southern coast of Greece yesterday. The Coast Guard has released an image of the crowded vessel before it sank. At least 78 migrants drowned and hundreds are still missing, feared dead. It's been described as one of Europe's deadliest disasters of its kind in recent years. It's believed the boat was on its way to Italy, having departed from the south of Crete. A vigil and a minute's silence will be held in Nottingham later after an attack in the city left 3 people dead. Grace O'Malley Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates were killed on Tuesday. Their families, friends and thousands of students gathered at the university yesterday to remember them. A 31-year-old man is being questioned on suspicion of murder. Today's vigil will be held in the Old Market Square from 5:30 this afternoon. An investigation is being launched by a police watchdog following the death of a man on a railway track after being chased by police. The incident happened in South London on Wednesday. Met Police says officers began pursuing a car after it failed to stop. They then lost sight of the driver, who's believed to have climbed a fence onto the train line. He was pronounced dead at the scene. One of 3 Brits who died after a boat caught fire in Egypt has been named as Christina Quinn. The 58-year-old was taking part in a scuba diving lesson on Sunday when the vessel burst into flames. Ms Quinn was a chief executive of St Luke's Hospice in Plymouth. It's understood the fire was caused by an electrical problem in the boat's engine room. Her family says she'll be missed beyond words. New figures show more than 500,000 NHS appointments and procedures have been postponed due to industrial action since December. Junior doctors in England are continuing their 72-hour strike action today in their ongoing pay dispute with the government. The walkout's expected to lead to tens of thousands more appointments and procedures being delayed. And spectacular new photographs of Mars have been released by NASA. The two shots capture both the morning and afternoon views of the red planet. They were taken in black and white by the Curiosity rover designed to explore Mars. The colour was then added in to enhance the planet's distinctive copper appearance. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back over to Bev and Andrew.
Good morning, it's 11:06. This is GB News. Thank you for joining us. Now, breaking news this morning. It has been breaking since exactly 9 o'clock because a devastating report into Boris Johnson and Partygate landed on our desks.
It's 30,000 words, it's 108 pages. It says the former Prime Minister repeatedly and recklessly misled the Commons and also the Commons inquiry over what he knew about parties at Downing Street.
Boris Johnson has, of course, called the report tripe and deranged, amongst other things.
Reactions are flooding in. The Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, she's had this to say about the report, speaking just as the committee published its findings.
Well, I haven't seen it, unfortunately, because obviously I was here with Tasha, so it's landed whilst not. I mean, obviously, Boris Johnson's made his decision. He's made the decision to resign. He obviously had seen the report as well. And, you know, it's a decision, actually two things. Decision for Parliament, the report, and a decision for Boris in terms of his own career.
And should MPs get a vote on the report?
I don't know what the actual process is, but I think typically they may have done. But right now, I guess, I don't know what we'd be voting on, to be honest, because Boris has resigned.
I guess it's voting to accept the findings, which some worry that could, you know, not look great on Rishi Sunak and your...
Well, that would be a matter for Parliament. So Parliament, this is actually Parliament that decide this. It's not the government. So Parliament will decide whether there's a vote and what the next steps are.
And how much damage do you think Boris Johnson's done to the party and politics generally?
Well, I mean, I think Boris has achieved an awful lot. I mean, you know, you can't take away the fact that Boris, you know, delivered the fastest vaccine rollout, obviously along with a whole load of other people, but, you know, he was the leader then. And I think in particular he'll be remembered for really taking a leadership role in Ukraine and the first response to Ukraine. And I heard somebody the other day say, oh, any Prime Minister would do that. Well, I don't agree with that, actually, because the choice of Prime Minister, the last election, was Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson. And I do not believe another Prime Minister would have done that.
Are you worried about the fact that this kind of back and forth between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson, you know, at the back end of last week and all this week, is distracting from serious problems?
Not at all. We are so focused on delivering for the country. Halving inflation is obviously the number one thing. Every single person is feeling the impacts of inflation. So that's the number one thing, halving inflation.
Gillian Keegan there, we had some audio issues, but from what I could tell, she was just talking in platitudes and trite sort of political cliches anyway.
She'd have been fed the line by Downing Street what to say, so nothing particularly illuminating there.
No.
But we are now going to speak to the former Downing Street Director of Communications, Jonathan Haslam. Jonathan, you and I used to talk a lot of times when you were working for John Major in Number 10, and they were often bad days for you as John Major got into all sorts of difficulties. How would you be spinning this one? Because this is a pretty bad day for Boris Johnson.
Well, it depends, Andrew, and good morning to you and Bev, who I'd be spinning it for. And if I was in Rishi Sunak's position now and his communications person, I would be saying this is entirely down to the House of Commons, as indeed it should be. And Gillian Keegan was put on the spot there. And I think she did quite well. I was interested that she did mention Brexit in Boris's achievements. But in terms of where we go from here, the House has to decide if it wants to put its own imprimatur on this report. And I think that would be a very good thing for democracy if it did, because Boris Johnson has tried to trash this report. As you said, Andrew, it's 108 pages. It's a forensic analysis of what was said and what he did and what he didn't do. And I think the House of Commons really should look at this and say, actually, that committee did a very, very thorough job and bent over backwards, to be fair to Boris Johnson. It invoked Sir Ernest Ryder, who's a former Justice of Appeal, to look at procedures. The Speaker's Council was also involved, and the clerks to the House of Commons. So I think it's really important for democracy not to be taken away by Twitter feeds from Boris Johnson and his acolytes and to look at the real substance of what has happened, and actually to thank that committee, dominated by Tories, and they have stood up and they have followed procedures. And I think they've done a very thorough job, and the House should take it further on from there.
Isn't the credibility of it undermined, though, Jonathan, by Harriet Harman herself and how publicly she'd stated that she believed that they'd lied throughout, even before she'd started chairing that committee?
No, because it's a convention that the opposition takes the chair in these circumstances. There are 4 members of Parliament, Conservative members of Parliament on it. It was a unanimous report, and I don't believe that Sir Charles Walker or Sir Bernard Jenkin or Albert Costa are anything other than full of integrity. They have all the options and the experience to be able to bring it to bear, and that's important. So it's an easy hit to say Harriet Harman expressed a view. But if you read the report, and it's really important to read the report, not just the Twitter feeds, you can see the care with which they have analysed it and the opportunities they've given Boris Johnson to respond with legal support. And look at the very end game. He was given an advance copy of that report. In its first sentence, it says, "It is a contempt of this House to release this document at this stage." And what did he do? Within hours of getting it, perhaps even minutes, he had decided on his course of action, and he had put out very elements of the report itself. That is, there is no more clear contempt of the House of Commons or that committee, one that he had at some point expressed confidence in. So his form, eventually what's happened is the rules have caught up with him for once, and he's paid the price. And I think that's really important for us to gather. And if the House of Commons decided that the Procedures Committee had got it wrong, they could have voted and they could have made their minds. If they voted then to put the Recall Act into play, it would be possible then for the electors of Uxbridge also to have a view. So this is not about traducing democracy. There are a lot of places there where Boris Johnson could have gone to appeal to people, to say they've got it wrong. He's chosen to jump ship, and I think that's a good thing for us all.
Jonathan, could I just ask you finally, again, with your experience of working for the Tory party when it was often in meltdown, can the Tory party now unite, or are they now fractured beyond belief? Because Boris Johnson is still a hugely popular figure, particularly with the party in the country.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Just a reminder, I was a civil servant working for a Conservative government. The answer to that is, I think he is, as one MP said today, nothing loses its credibility quicker than an ex-MP. Now, of course, he's a bigger figure than that, but his record doesn't help him. And the party will look at this straightforward thing, as happened, as you remember very clearly, with John Major's administration. Yeah. When the party starts to commit fratricide, and it's doing it on matinees, on Wednesdays and Saturdays, the electorate is going to notice. And that is something he's got to deal with. Does he wish to trash all of the Conservative Party because of his own ego, or does he want to take a longer view? My bet is on the former rather than the latter.
Very interesting, Jonathan, as ever. That's Jonathan Howson, former Downing Street Director of Communications. Quite right when I was talking about the Tory party. He didn't work for the Tory party, he worked for the John Major's government. In those days, they were very much civil servants who ran the press operation at Number 10 in the way they don't so much now.
Do you know what was interesting, though, listening to Jonathan? I miss there being adults in the room.
Yeah, because he's a grown-up.
I miss politics at a time when there were adults who were measured and fair and principled and displayed values. And is that harsh?
Jonathan Haslam, of course, because he was a civil servant, very senior, he will have read that report, which we still haven't had a chance to do from beginning to end, all 30,000 words of it. Now, we now are going to get a predictable response, of course, from Labour's Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, who's absolutely no fan of Boris Johnson, is she? And this is what she had to say about the Privileges Committee report.
Deputy Labour Leader, the Privileges Committee have published their report. What do you make of it?
Well, I think the Privileges Committee is pretty damning. You know, it's serious. Boris Johnson is not only a lawbreaker but a liar. He's not fit for public office and he's disgraced himself and continues to act like a, pound-shot Trump in the way in which he tries to discredit anybody who criticises his actions when actually a decent public servant would have done the honourable thing, would have had a little bit of humility and would have apologised to the British public for what they put them through.
He says he hasn't done anything wrong, that it's a witch hunt, that they've set out to get him from the beginning. What do you make of that response?
I think it's a load of rubbish and he knows it, and that's why he didn't challenge his seat. That's why he's resigned, because he knows he wouldn't win that by-election, because he knows the public can see through this act, this clown act that he puts on, whereas it's pretty obvious that that report is very damning into what happened, and he's disgraced himself and he should apologise to the British people, and Rishi Sunak shouldn't have propped him up for as long as he has, and the British public shouldn't be paying for the lawbreaker and the liar for his legal defence when he hasn't got a defence because he's banged to rights on what he's done.
They recommended a 90-day suspension. Obviously, that won't happen because he's resigned, but also stripping him of his parliamentary pass, so he wouldn't potentially even be allowed back in the Palace of Westminster. Is that going a little bit far for somebody who was Prime Minister?
No, I don't, because somebody like him should never have been Prime Minister, because he's shown that he can uphold the standards in public life. Look, under Prime Minister Boris Johnson, we had the ministerial code continually breached. He did nothing about that. We had the scandal of PPE contracts and cronyism. We've seen him trying to stuff the Lords with people that aided and abetted him during that period, and he's undermined his office and he's undermined the office of Prime Minister. He's a disgraced Prime Minister. He shouldn't be anywhere near Parliament. He should apologise to the people for what he's put them through. People lost their loved ones and wasn't able to see people in their dying minutes while he was getting drunk at number 10 having parties, knowing full well that that was completely unacceptable. He should have admitted it, he should have apologised, and instead he's blaming everybody else, which is a pattern of behaviour from Boris Johnson. He needs to start to grow up and accept responsibility for his actions.
He says that the Privileges Committee can't possibly know what was going on in his head. Does he have a point with that?
Well, the Privileges Committee are not trying to see what's going on in his head. They've gone off the evidence, they've followed a due diligent process, and they've come to a conclusion, which is a very damning conclusion. The Privileges Committee are made up of members of Parliament from different political parties, including Conservatives. Their job is to find the truth and to put forward the report, which is what they've done. And to try and discredit them when he's the discredited one is a disgraceful pattern of behaviour, and it cannot be allowed to stand. Not in the heart of Parliament, not in our democracy. It's unacceptable, and he needs to go now, and he needs to apologise for what he's put the British public through. He won't, though, because Boris Johnson never accepts responsibility for the things that he does, and it's about time he does.
The Privileges Committee.
You know what I was saying about missing the being adults in the room in politics?
Right.
That is exactly what I'm talking about, Angela Rayner there. Not really landing any blows, telling us what we already sort of have worked out.
And also telling us that
really
the committee wasn't trying to read the former Prime Minister when it did, because it said he must have seen when he walked up some stairs a party going, how would they know that? But a couple of things to pick up on too. She said it's outrageous that the taxpayer is paying for his legal advice. These were questions that were raised about his performance as Prime Minister and in the House of Commons. And of course he should be supported by the taxpayer. And when Tony Blair was put through the ringer over the Iraq War, no longer Prime Minister, barely, he was given public support via the taxpayer for his legal aid. And as for the House of Lords being stuffed with Tory cronies, quite right. But who did Keir Starmer stuff in the House of Lords a few months ago? A man called Tom Watson, former Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, a man who traduced the reputation and record of people like Lord Bramall, Harvey Proctor and the late Leon Britton, who he suggested had been linked to a paedophile. That paedophile is now in prison for lying about those very allegations, which Tom Watson made the allegations against those people in the House of Commons, where he could not be sued for libel. He should not be in the House of Lords, Angela Rayner. So take the mote out your eye, love.
But Angela Rayner, if you'd ever like to come in here and have a conversation with us, we would welcome you any time to have a proper debate. Tom Harwood is with us. Good morning, Tom, still. This story's been rumbling on, as we said. This landed at 9 o'clock this morning. I am looking forward to Monday to the vote, actually, on this now, as to what move this forward, what happens next.
Yeah, I think it's very unlikely that the House of Commons will reject the recommendations of this committee. We've seen what happens before when the Commons tries to sort of change the terms by which a committee has arrived at a conclusion. The particular example, of course, is the Owen Paterson affair, where a parallel committee was attempted to be set up to sort of re-evaluate the conclusion, and it was just an incredibly bad look for the government. They ended up backing down and accepting the suspension recommendation from the committee. I find it very hard to believe that anything other than accepting the committee's recommendations will happen on Monday. There has been some speculation that a wording could be found that the government says we note the conclusions of this of this investigation rather than we accept the conclusions. I just think if they tried to do that, the Labour Party would then amend it to say we accept, and they would be hard-pressed to vote against that.
And don't you think, Tom, that Rishi wants to nail Boris down now and finish him off, so the bigger the number of MPs who vote for a report saying we accept it, the more damaging it is for Boris. I think that's where they are.
The only question for number 10 is how many MPs will break the whip, if you like. I mean, it is a free vote, so it's not a whip vote, but how many will break the recommendation, shall we say, of number 10 and try and save Boris Johnson? We already know that Brendan Clarke-Smith, the Conservative MP,
Red Wall MP,
knew in 2019, believes he owes Boris Johnson his seat.
He does.
Would not be there without Boris Johnson. That's his view. He will not be voting to sanction these sanctions, for want of a better phrase. But the question is how many more will, and I would be surprised if it's more than a handful of MPs.
Right. And if you remember when Boris Johnson voted against the Windsor Withdrawal Agreement, Rishi's better Brexit deal than Boris's, only 20 or so were with Boris and Liz Truss, ironically.
Yes, I think that it will be interesting to look at the numbers, but the numbers will not be in the favour of Boris Johnson. One interesting parallel, I've been looking at some of the MPs who have had the Committee on Privileges recommend they be suspended for the House in recent years. You're very hard-pressed to find someone to be recommended a suspension of 90 days. More than 30 days is very hard.
Exactly.
In fact, 30 days was the recommended suspension for Margaret Ferrier. And just to remember what she did, she took a test for COVID, was supposed to isolate, and then she visited a gym, visited a beauty salon, visited a gift shop, took a train from Scotland down to London, spoke in Parliament, then received a positive test result, and then took a train back up to Scotland again.
And she didn't kill anyone, so there you go. Right,
well,
still to
30
come.
days.
We're going to be crossing over to Nottingham in just a moment to see how the community have reacted to the horrendous stabbings. You're with GB News. First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:26. You're with To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So away from the drama at Westminster for just a moment, Nottingham is preparing for another vigil today after the heartbroken families of the two murdered 19-year-old students were joined by thousands of people at the university's main campus last night.
We also, of course, had that very moving statement from the children of Ian Coates, who was the 65-year-old caretaker who was also stabbed to death.
Yeah.
We're going to get an update from our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who's in Nottingham. Mark, morning.
Good morning.
The images of the vigil last night, almost impossible to watch, so moving, and then to read the very moving statement from the sons of Ian Coates, a man who was only a few months in retirement, who appears to have stopped his van as a good Samaritan because he'd been flagged down and was then stabbed to death for his troubles.
Yeah, I mean, the emotional resilience, the courage that it took for the fathers of young Grace O'Malley Kumar and, of course, Barnaby Webster Webber, I should say, to stand up in front of all of those fellow students, tutors, and the world's cameras who are here to look after, to film that, to stand there and pay tribute. It was deeply emotional for them, but clearly they wanted to do that. They said they felt a part of Nottingham because both Grace and Barnaby absolutely loved it here and couldn't wait to be part of the scene and the university life up here in Nottingham. As far as the investigation is concerned, well, we know that we're now looking at 5 crime scenes. We were, until about yesterday afternoon, only talking about 4 crime scenes. Ilkeston Road, of course, where Barnaby and Grace were stabbed to death. Magdala Road, where Ian Coates was stabbed to death. Here in Milton Street, where those 3 members of the public were run over by the van stolen from Ian Coates. And then further up the road from Milton Street, at the point where the police stopped the van and arrested their prime suspect. Now there is a 5th crime scene. It is a residential complex for vulnerable homeless people, where at about 5:15 in the morning there was a sound of banging on the windows outside, as it now appears the prime suspect in this case was trying to enter that particular home. I spoke to one of the residents, Jason Derbyshire, who was wakened by the sound of banging, who opened his curtain to see this man. This is what Jason told me.
Woke up about 5:15. I normally wake up quite early to go to work. Like I say, I've not been here long. Opened the curtains, and there was just some guy stood under this archway, all dressed in black, got a black rucksack, black beanie hat on, just staring at the edges over there. Gone back in my room, had a wash. 30 seconds later, there's really banging, loud banging, trying to get through that window. I didn't see the security guard come out, but apparently he did. The guy asked him, is it a hospital or a hostel? He went, no, it's a hostel. And then he just came back through this archway and just walked off there, dead calm.
So police have been carrying out door-to-door inquiries in that area around this residential complex. As far as the suspect's concerned, well, we were told that he has not been cooperating with detectives. No indication that that situation has changed. Of course, he can be held, given it's such a serious offence, for up to 96 hours, providing the police, of course, apply for these extensions. He can be held for up to 96 hours before he then either has to be charged or released.
OK, thank you, Mark. And we're just looking at pictures of the vigil from last night, and it's just so sad, the parents being so stoic under the most awful circumstances.
Coming together in that way, and fantastic that so many people were there, and the parents are obviously clearly distressed, and the children.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't forget lovely Ian Coates, who used to take little children from deprived backgrounds on fishing trips because he wanted to make sure they never got just a few months away from his retirement. Devastating for his two sons and his family.
Awful. Right, still to come this morning, Sam Lister and Carol Malone will be back with us to go over some of the stories that are hitting the headlines. But first of all, here's the news with Rayner.
Good morning. It's 11:32. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Boris Johnson has rejected the findings of the inquiry, which says he deliberately misled Parliament over Partygate. The report says the former Prime Minister committed a serious contempt and was complicit in the campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. Mr Johnson describes it as a deranged conclusion and accused the inquiry of hypocrisy. The former PM would have faced a recommended suspension of 90 days had he not quit as an MP. MPs will debate the Privileges Committee report into his conduct on Monday. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is yet to comment on the report. This morning he was at an immigration centre and attended a raid in West London. His visit comes a day after the number of people crossing the English Channel this year passed 9,000. The PM acknowledged more needs to be done to stop small boats and stressed the importance of the illegal migration bill. Meanwhile, an image of a boat crowded with migrants has been released. That says rescuers worked to search for survivors after it capsized off the coast of Greece yesterday. At least 78 people drowned and hundreds are still missing, feared dead. It's being described as one of Europe's deadliest disasters of its kind in recent years. It's believed the boat was on its way to Italy, having departed from the south of Crete. And a vigil and a minute's silence will be held in Nottingham later after an attack in the city left 3 people dead. Grace O'Malley-Coomer, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates were killed on Tuesday. Their families, friends and thousands of students gathered at the university yesterday to remember them. A 31-year-old man is being questioned on suspicion of murder. Today's vigil will be held in the Old Market Square from 5:30 this afternoon. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2662 and €1.1679. The price of gold is £1,528.78 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,615 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
The formidable Sam Lister and Carol Malone will be back in the studio with us. This is The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You name it, coming in.
Welcome back to GB News. We've had a busy morning and you've been getting in touch. Eugenia says many MPs in the past have claimed the police should not investigate themselves, so why is it right that MPs investigate their own alleged misdeeds?
They've done that for years.
Andy has said two things. I think Boris Johnson was as guilty as hell on all charges, but I also think this committee was a total stitch-up. Political verdicts were made before it even started.
That's going to be
And
the
so on and so on.
constant refrain, Sam Lister, isn't it? Because of the presence of one Harriet Harman, a very divisive figure in her own right, actually.
Yeah.
She's a former acting leader of the Labour Party, not once but twice. and she makes no secret of her contempt for Tories. She admits to me, she said to me many times, "Oh, I don't have friends who are Tories."
Well, this is a big Labour thing, isn't it?
Tribal.
You know, the never kissed a Tory thing. They don't like to engage with the opposition, do they? So it's a very tribal party. But also there were Conservatives on there who have a clear history of not being great pals with Boris Johnson.
Bernard Jenkins being the number one.
Yeah, the number one. And so that does actually play into Boris Johnson's hands here. It does allow him to talk about the bias of the committee, the kangaroo court, as he describes it. And we know from his response, he says the findings are deranged. So this is going to go on and on. This is not the end, is it?
Well, we had big viewing figures yesterday, Bev, didn't we? Because in the build-up to... Yeah, always great that you tune in and listen to us, of course. In the build-up to Dame Carolyn McCall, the chief executive of ITV, going before that committee of MPs to talk about the fact that they'd done a major investigation, we were told, into Philip Schofield and his relationship inappropriate with a much younger man.
Admittedly, it wasn't the most gripping viewing, the live footage of this committee hearing, but you tuned in, and what did you make of it, Carol? What did you make of the findings?
Well, she said they had done a thorough investigation. This was before the committee. Suddenly at the committee, she said they hadn't done an investigation at all.
An ongoing review, wasn't it?
Which I thought it was a bit bizarre. But she knew about this. Our own Dan Wootton here told her in 2019 when, saw her and said this was going on, and it was just dismissed as malicious gossip. Yeah. But, what it struck me yesterday is, her and Kevin Ligo, she's the CEO on 3.5 million a year. Kevin Ligo is the manager.
3.5 million.
Did I not say that?
Well, you said 1.35.
No, 3.5
Oh, did I?
million.
3.5. Oh, sorry, I know it's 3.5.
I'm going deaf.
Just make our ears ring.
It's your ears, you've gone deaf.
Yeah.
And he's on goodness knows what. He's the managing director. So the two of them sat there yesterday, and it made it sound like they didn't know what was going on in their own company and on their own flagship TV show, which is astonishing. So every time she said something like...
Sorry, just to interrupt you, Carol, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Breaking news.
Oh.
Double Oscar-winning actress and former Labour MP Glenda Jackson has died aged 87 after a brief illness at her home in Blackheath, South East London, according to her agents.
She was a brilliant MP. She won 2 Oscars after a long career at Westminster. She came into Westminster in 1992 in Hampstead in North London. She wasn't a great success as an MP, to be honest. She became Transport Minister, complete waste of time. What did they make of the Arts Minister, for God's sake? An Oscar-winning actress. She had been thought she might become the Mayor of London, but they blew that as well. And then she stood down a few years ago and went back to Broadway and the West End, and won. I think she won a Tony.
She was an extraordinary actress, and I never understood her decision to leave. It's a very hard decision to leave a glamorous life like Hollywood, I think.
She thought parts were drying up. In 1992, 30 years ago.
Yeah, and then she goes to politics where it's really dry. But I mean, it's quite a brave thing to do, I think, to just dump that kind of career where you're respected and you're well thought of. But you're right. I always thought she was rather beautiful as well. I mean, she never thought she would, but I always thought she was an incredibly beautiful woman. But it's very sad. I didn't realise she was 87. I have to say, I didn't realise that, and she certainly didn't act like 87. And of course, her son is Dan Hodges.
He's a columnist. Was one of my colleagues at the Mail on Sunday. She was a very feisty speaker, and
you wouldn't want to mess with her.
People always listen to her. I can remember when the day Mrs Thatcher died, there were tributes. Whereas most MPs pay tribute warmly and richly, she did not. She said, "I'm not going to stand up and do that at all." I thought she was a dreadful woman, did terrible things in the country, and it caused frictions. But she's entitled to her view.
Absolutely. Which would upset you, of course, because you thought...
I thought she was entitled, but I thought she was wrong.
But you thought that Maggie Thatcher was your hero.
I have a life-size cardboard cutout of Mrs Thatcher in my study.
This is not a joke. He does. You walk in, the first thing you see in his house, and it's now been relegated to the studio. It used to be in the living room.
Why is it been relegated, Andrew? We need to know.
Sometimes coming for dinner. Suddenly it appears by the table and they nearly have a shock.
And he's got photographs.
Splattered all over the table.
He's got photographs of her and him
and me.
all over the living room.
I loved her.
Well, I just on Glenda Jackson, I think the term "no nonsense" was definitely invented for Glenda Jackson, and I did ring her up once, many moons ago, when I was just a little cub reporter, very kind of, scared of my own shadow, and she left me truly terrified, but in the best possible fashion. There was a theatre in the Wirral, which was it was the Glenda Jackson Theatre. theatre, and they were knocking it down, and I rang her up to find out her response. You know, how do you feel about this theatre named in your honour being knocked down? And she just could not give a stuff.
Oh, really?
That is the polite way of explaining it. So, but, you know, fair enough. And I think it just didn't matter to her. Things like that did not matter to her. And that, you know...
She wasn't a sentimentalist, was she?
Not at all. Not at all.
That's why she was able to give up Hollywood, I guess.
Yeah, big loss to the acting, because she really was one of the greats.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 Oscars.
Yeah.
It's remarkable.
Yeah.
Shall we return?
We're going back to Caroline McCall, Dame Caroline McCall, who, of course, got her damehood for services to aviation.
Yes.
When she was at EasyJet.
Yes, I met her a few times then. Anyway, but this is the point. So she was at this committee yesterday, and she was saying, was she aware that this affair that Schofield had was an open secret? And she said no. Now, it's been an open secret in the media
Absolutely.
for years.
I know.
So how could she not know it was an open secret at ITV, where people talk? So where does she think the media got it from? From ITV.
So she said she couldn't investigate because she asked him,
and he lied. He outright,
asked the person referred to as Person X, and he said there was no relationship. So there's nothing to investigate.
And of course they would lie. Of course they're going to lie. So what you do? But she made it sound like she said that she'd heard lots of rumours, but there was no evidence. Did she expect other people to deliver the evidence? Why didn't she go and find the evidence? She's got a big organisation. But basically, I mean, Kevin Ligo had a pop at Eamon as well. They poured scorn on our very own Eamon Holmes here. Poured scorn on him. His incredibly courageous stance on this. But you know, she's paid the big bucks, and so is Ligo, to know what's going on in their company. You know, they have a duty of care for the people who work for them. And the two of them are sitting there going, didn't know. It's not an excuse.
No. What did you make of it, Sam?
Well, I think the phrase that springs to mind for me is willful blindness.
Yes.
Very good.
There is a kind of intent on their part to just ignore what everybody else was talking about. And fine, you can ask these people, and of course they're going to say no. You have to take charge as the executives to properly investigate this. And then she admitted that they hadn't done that. And I do think they didn't want to find anything, did they?
No.
They did not want to find it.
Because he was big money spinner and big with the appetite.
She said she was asked, would she have sacked him had she known? And her response was interesting. She said, if it had been necessary, I would have. Well, what does she mean? Of course it was necessary. So that's saying that she wasn't going to do it. And Sam's dead right. She didn't want to rock this morning's very successful boat, which is now falling off a cliff, actually. But there you go.
Which we're quite grateful
yes,
for.
exactly.
On this time of the day.
We had Stephen Pound sitting where you are yesterday, the former Labour MP. He said, actually, what business is it of a select committee to be talking to the boss of ITV about whether a relationship between a famous household name presenter and a young man that was legal? What business is it of a select committee?
Well,
does he have a point?
Actually, a lot of the MPs on the committee were raising this point themselves yesterday and saying, why are we actually here discussing it? But
the committee chairwoman invited them.
Exactly. And I think the point is that actually this is bigger than Philip Schofield. It's not about Philip Schofield and his personal life. It's about the safeguarding issues at ITV. Were they properly looking after young people who are in their employment? And that's it's one of our domestic national broadcasters, and that's why there is a public interest in that.
The only thing is, we have to also, I'm very careful to point this out, Philip Schofield is not accused of anything illegal. He hasn't done anything illegal. Our understanding is that when he had a relationship with person X, it was consensual and this person was over 18. Now, when she says if I would have sacked him if it was necessary, the only circumstances surely under which that would have been necessary is if it wasn't consensual or if he was under 18.
No, I don't think so. I think he was young when he started there. He was 18. I think he was younger than 18 when he started as a runner.
Yeah.
What it is, it's about a young boy being influenced by a much older man, and maybe
who was married at the time.
Who was married at the time, and he was supposed to be straight. We thought he was straight at the time, it's about him falling.
By the way,
we've all known for a long time that
I absolutely did not think he was straight.
Yeah, I mean, like 20-odd years. I mean, completely. But anyway. I was going to say something. It's good I didn't. I'll shut up. But
that would be unusual.
It is
Carol Malone's going to shut up. When's that ever happened?
Well, it was about what was the offence.
It's about duty of care. It's about him abusing his position of power. Because at the time, he was a 56-year-old man, and this boy was rising through the ranks. And Ligo was asked yesterday, would the boy, when the affair was over, the boy was moved to Loose Women? And Caroline McCall said, says he was absolutely promoted. Kevin Ligo said it wasn't unusual for presenters to request that people be moved to another show. So kind of, you know...
Because of the power they have.
Yes. So, you know, so the implication was that maybe Schofield asked for him to be moved to get him out of his sight and out of his vision. But it was... I just don't think either of them came out of this very well.
Yeah, and the Mail made the point, which they didn't challenge, he was paid money.
Yes.
By ITV.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, there are shareholders involved here.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know
Yes.
how much the money was, but they didn't ask about that, because I'd like to know, what was he paid for?
Yes.
Was it to
That's a
gag
smoking
him?
gun, right
Was
there.
it to gag him? To
Yes.
silence him?
That's
to get him
exactly
out
it.
the country?
Why pay him money?
Yeah, because
there
we
has
know
to be a
he left
reason.
the country,
Yeah.
so did ITV put him on a plane?
Yeah.
How much did they pay him?
But could I just go back to Bev's point on this being consensual? I had a very long chat last night with a female colleague who is furious about this. I mean, she was so angry, and she's particularly angry about the use of the word consensual, because her point is, and I think it's probably a fair one, it's not really consensual when you have somebody who is barely out of their teenage years and you have a man in their 50s.
Yes.
You know, the concept of consent is very fluid at that point.
Except that all
when they're your boss.
Except that all 18-year-olds think that they're adults and they think they know better than the adults. And I can tell you, as the mother of a 19-year-old, if he was having a relationship with someone significantly younger, 18, and I said to him, "What are you doing?" He'd say, "I'm an adult, Mum. You can't tell me what to do."
If it was with their boss, then that's a whole different ball game.
And the 56-year-old, not just the boss, but the biggest name at ITV.
Totally. And also taking him out for posh dinners, taking him to places, having him promoted, making show reels for him, giving him special treatment. So, you know...
But I guess he isn't his boss. He isn't his boss, really, is he?
He is. Well, he got him the job.
Schofield wasn't paying his wages.
No.
Yeah, but he did
got him the job and got him out of the job.
Yeah, and got him out of the job, quite right.
Yeah. Supposedly, I mean, allegedly.
It's
stress that.
The whole thing has been so unedifying.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that Ligo had said yesterday that he wasn't aware of one single offence of bullying at this morning, which has been accused of toxicity. And then John Nicholson, the MP, very cleverly read out an email that had been sent to Ligo pointing out instances of bullying, which just shows that they're all trying to cover their own backsides.
And it was a very good
to save
intervention
their
by John
jobs.
Nicholson, because he's a former broadcaster of some stature and experience himself, so he knows how it works. He knows how it works.
He knows exactly how it works.
Well, I've got some emails from the editor, Martin Frizzell, to me during the pandemic when I would go on there and say what I think. I haven't released them.
Yeah.
Yet.
Hang on. Yeah, hang on.
There's no journalists listening, are there?
Time is coming.
Anyway, right, should we move on? How much time have we got? We can talk to you, right, a bit longer. What is this about the woke army in the Mail? The head of the army is considering scrapping masculine titles.
Believe this.
Do you know, at a time when, you know, Ukraine's at war, Russia's deploying, you know, nuclear weapons to Belarus, China's hell-bent on, bombing the world. Our army is talking about titles. We're not going to call people guardsmen or riflemen anymore. We're going to call them, what do we call them? Guards? I don't know, guards people.
Rifle people.
So so they're going to take the gender out of this, which is, so instead of aircraftsmen, it's going to be air specialists.
It's pathetic.
It is totally and utterly pathetic. I mean, there are some women in the Rifles Battalion, interestingly, who've said, "Don't you dare take this title away from me. I worked really hard to get the title of rifleman. Don't take it away."
Yeah.
But there are other women who are saying that they feel excluded. Well, you know, I have to ask myself...
Who are they?
Well, exactly. Who are they? And should you really be in the army? If you feel excluded
These
by
are
being
white,
called...
middle-class, well-meaning liberal idiots have come up with this.
What do you think, Sam?
Well, I have to confess, I'm actually, at the moment, a chairman.
Hey!
and hopefully people can quite happily, easily realise that I am not a man. I don't think it needs explaining, hopefully not. And I don't have a problem with that at all. I dislike the use of the word chair. I find that quite...
Well, I'm glad you raised that, because when I interviewed Harriet Harman, who, of course, has chaired this Great Privileges Committee, which we talked about, I said to her, why do you want to be called a chair? A chair is what people sit on. Why do you want... that used
exactly.
Why can't you be a chairwoman or a chair?
Yeah.
A chair. She said, it's an inanimate object. I said, no, it's what people sit on. I will never use the word chair.
Yeah, I think that's it. It was drummed into me when I was a very young reporter. It's an inanimate object that we don't, you know, you have the chairwoman, chairman, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think the wider point is, if you are offended by this kind of thing, then why are you going into the army? Really?
It's a rough.
I'm not sure it's the place for you.
You're fretting about that in the Ukraine.
Well, no, and I just think if you go to war, it doesn't matter what anybody calls you, as long as you survive. That's the most important thing.
Can
we talk talk about this person who's alive in the coffin?
We've got 30 seconds.
Right,
Go on.
OK, this is a woman in Ecuador.
I love
this
this
is my
story.
greatest fear in the whole
Me
world.
too.
So I don't want to be buried.
Me too.
OK, so she's in the coffin. They're doing this funeral service and they hear this little knocking like this. And it's her. She's in the coffin and she's alive.
Yeah.
No.
So she's had a heart attack. Doctor pronounced her dead. He should be struck off straight away. and the whole family nearly died because
I know.
they heard Melinda, she's awake.
I know.
You know, in Victorian times, they used to take a bell into the coffin just in case this
that's
very
horrifying.
happened.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll put a bell in your coffin.
Well, the thing is, I don't want to be burned alive either, because, you know, if you get into the... Sam I was just talking about, you're chugging along on the thing, and you know the fire's there, and you can hear it, and they can't hear you because they're all crying.
Carol, we've got to go.
I mean, you probably would be dead.
Yeah.
You say, like, it's very, very rare.
We don't want you to go anywhere, Carol.
OK,
Right, we've come to the end of the show. Thank you both so much, Sam and Carol. We've come to the end of another week for To The Point, but coming up next is GB News Live with Stephen Dixon. We'll see you Monday.
See you then.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's another stunning day today, sunshine and very warm once again for many of us, but an increased chance of some serious thunderstorms for some later in the day. For the time being, high pressure in charge, that's to the north of the UK. Still an easterly airflow, keeping things cooler on the east coast, but inland widely temperatures will quickly rise through the morning with the wall-to-wall sunshine. As temperatures rise, there's likely to be a bit more cloud development, I think, especially towards southern and southwestern parts compared with Wednesday. But actually, for most, it's a fine day to come. Odd shower possible across North Wales as the temperatures rise, and they will rise once again into the mid to high 20s, widely above average for the time of year, but a bit more limited there for the east coast of England. Into the evening, however, some serious thunderstorms are likely to get going across Ireland, and they're most likely to drift north into parts of Northern Ireland, especially western parts. And where these hit, we largely dry overnight, clear spells, but temperatures remaining at 15-16 Celsius across parts of the south. So a muggy night for sleeping, but a widely sunny start once again. On Friday, any thunderstorms across Ireland move away for the time being, but they develop once again into Friday afternoon and more likely to hit parts of Northern Ireland into the afternoon and evening, whilst other storms could develop across northwest England, southwest Scotland, parts of Wales as well. Once again, these will be very localised, but where they occur, they're going to be pretty lively. More widely, thunderstorms and showers will develop across western and southwestern parts on Saturday, and then across the rest of the UK generally into Sunday. And at the same time, it will turn a bit cooler.
First and foremost, I am a GB News